Hi everyone and welcome. I'm really glad you could join us for this fireside chat. We got a fantastic conversation lined up with two industry leaders, Dwayne Gefferie, the payment strategist, and Yasser Abou-Nasr, SVP Product at IXOPAY. We'll be diving into how payment orchestration is evolving to support the needs of global merchants, touching on everything from architecture to strategy, to the impact of emerging technologies like stablecoins and AI. So get comfortable and let's get started. Large merchants often choose to work with multiple payment processors, not only for redundancy and risk mitigation, but also because no single provider offers comprehensive global coverage or excels at every single use case. So what is the core value proposition of payment orchestration platforms?
Well, you're absolutely right. There are no providers that provide a comprehensive coverage, and global merchants today they've outgrown their legacy stack. Let's call it that, right? So they have growing demands. Their demands are going to be around: I need more markets, I need more methods, I need more, mandates that I have to go after. And as you said, there's no processor that is able to keep up with all of it. So payment orchestration is no longer for these providers an option. I think payment orchestration is infrastructure, and there's definitely an opportunity for them to re-platform their infrastructure, and that's where IXOPAY really comes into play. Right, with payment orchestration. The value props of payment orchestration is that single API to multiple rails. With IXOPAY, you get to unlock 200 processors, and by the end of this quarter, we'll be in about 140 different geos, right? Servicing, 300 APMs and multiple rails. All of that gives that acceleration to market for those enterprise merchants. Things that would cost them months and years into days and weeks.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, what real problem do you solve? I mean, for merchants that have, to deal with, 5 to 6 payment service providers, loads of APMs, what is it that you solve for them?
Well, a lot of them built their own infrastructure, right? And as you said, they already had 1 or 2 different PSPs, but they're coming across limitations and other aspects of saying, hey, these PSPs are not doing it for me, and I need to get to this market, or I need to support that APM. And they're going through what we call maintenance fatigue, right? Which is one of the core problems. And they're saying, okay, you know what? It's time for us to re-platform here, right? And that's one of the biggest problems, is that connectivity, right? Which we have the deepest graph in out of all payment orchestration platforms. But then the other aspect that they're going after, right, is, what I call, turning your payments from a cost center to a revenue center, right? So on average, our merchants leverage our smart dynamic routing, and they get, a 15% authorization rate, benefit from leveraging our platform.
What do you see, Dwayne? Because you work with a lot of merchants. What do you see as their biggest pain points, and how payment orchestration is solving that? And also maybe a little bit about the evolution of payment orchestration, because I recall back in the days we were talking about payment gateways that were to a certain extent solving that same problem,
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we really look at the way that orchestration has really developed, we have to go back, right? You see the Googles, the Facebooks, the Ubers of the world, the ones who are truly digital, truly global, probably as the first merchants of their time. What we saw that the evolution that they had back then is that they had to, at an early age, start integrating with all of those different PSPs, all of those different payment methods. So a lot of them started hiring their own payments teams. They started building their own infrastructure. So the birth actually of orchestration on a payments level was at those enterprise merchants building their own internal stack. A lot of that has also led to people leaving those companies and coming up with that idea and saying, hey, well, while I was at Facebook or Google or any of those other companies, we did orchestration. That then led into other merchants also started saying, hey, well, if we're hitting $1 billion, that was sort of like the benchmark at that time. If we're hitting that, we need to start building our own platform as well. And then you had others who saying, well, what if we build a platform for them? So you had early orchestrations who sort of like jumped into that market and started to develop that. I think fast forward to what we see right now is that there's a couple of things happening. One, merchants, especially if you look at like artificial intelligence, SaaS companies, just the truly digital merchants, they don't just start a business and are very localized. They're global from day one, right? Like look at all of the AI companies that we're seeing right now, like an OpenAI and Anthropic. When they launch, they're global immediately.
That vision is right there, yeah.
That vision is right there. So having just one gateway, of course, if you're growing at such a rapid pace, you're probably not looking at cost saving at that level. You just want to have acceptance as much as possible. But where we see orchestration come in is not necessarily at that $1 billion mark. It's actually coming down. It might be a 10 million or 50 million or 100 million, where they're already looking at it and saying, hey, we want to be in all these different markets, but payment method adoption isn't the same everywhere else. Not everybody's using credit cards. Some are using debit cards. Some are using an alternative payment method. So what we're seeing now is just that the merchant of today is saying at an earlier point in their growth curve, basically, as they're ramping up their revenue, they go to orchestration and go to a platform and saying, we don't have the resources or we don't have the capacity right now to go and build that. So we'll go to a platform who gives us that instant access to all of those markets. And then we can just do the three things that all of them want to do is one, optimize for authorization rate, two, make sure that they have the best pricing possible, and also three, de-riskify themselves as well by taking payment methods in local markets that have much more secure features to it or adding secure features to it as well, right? Using tokenization, using 3DS, using other elements in it as well without having to do a project for each one of them. So that's what I'm seeing with not just merchants across on the enterprise side, but also at what we would normally consider a middle-size type of merchant. So all the way up, they're using orchestration. They're leveraging it as that first layer for them to really be truly global.
It truly is like a full score, aspect, right? You can't just sit there and say, like, if you think about a payment gateway, as he was talking about, right? Payment gateways, the best analogy that I like to give is like that of a concert hall, right? A payment gateway is like a soloist, right? Yeah. It's an instrument that they play perfectly until I need more instruments. And right now we're at a phase of payments where it's more instruments are required, right? And those instruments are if you think about payment orchestration, right? Us being the maestro, right? It's bringing in all the different sections, right? The brass, the winds, and the percussions together, right? But also packaging that with network tokens and card lifecycle management and all the latest and greatest, right, with smart dynamic routing, right, against geo, bin, as you talked about, right, risk and cost, and really creating that perfect performance. And that perfect performance is not an option anymore. That's a requirement, right? Alternative payments are not alternative anymore. We can see data that shows us, right, and where they sit between, cash and digital, or, between cash and credit cards, right, that they are now a main player. They're a main aspect, right? It's not.
Yeah. No, I like the analogy that you made.
Yeah.
I want to get back to the topic that you raised earlier, Dwayne, about these enterprise merchants like Google and the likes that were basically building Netflix, that were building their own payment orchestration. But you also see companies that outsource that to payment orchestration providers or take a hybrid approach, build themselves and use solutions like IXOPAY. What typically drives that decision, and how do they evaluate the trade-offs between control, cost, and complexity? Is it just size, or what are the other drivers?
Yeah, so I think the first realization that we have to make is that payments is not in the lead for how things are developing anymore. And what I mean by that is we had a time where getting from in-person payments to online, it was the payments companies were sort of like dictating what was possible, and it was for the merchant to adapt to it. Fast forward again to where we are right now, it's the merchant who's in the driver's seat. They decide everything, including which payment method, which rails they're using, and which platform they're using as well. So if you look through that lens and you sort of like understand, hey, wait a second, if the merchant is really the one driving that innovation, how do companies then adapt to that? Well, I think I look at it from two different sides, and this might be a little bit complex, but I say on one side, we have what we call modular payments, right? It's on the side of the PSP, the acquirer, it's all of those components who now are much more API driven, right? It's can we have that connectivity and can we put a stack together that actually makes sense? But on the merchant side, it's much more what I call composable payments. It's pretty much the same topic, but it's at the same time, it's a merchant will look at payments more as in, what am I trying to achieve? What is my goal as a merchant? If I'm a brand new AI startup, I want to get to 100 million ARR as quickly as possible. So I need it to be simple, just need a simple subscription, one specific amount, maybe two, maybe three, but I just need it to go as seamless as possible. So they're going to make decisions that are aimed towards their goal of getting to that 100 million ARR. However, if you're in a different field, let's say you're in a gaming or you're in another field, risk might be much more of your forte. Like, hey, yes, we want to get to that number, but we also want to make it so that we don't get hit with a lot of chargebacks and we don't hit with all of those issues. So then your decision-making process becomes different. It's not driven about smooth and easy, but it's much more, okay, it's a little bit more complex, but we need to have the secure elements in there as much as possible. We want to have 3DS in there. We want to use tokenization. We want to have a great fraud engine in there as well so that we can mitigate as much of that risk as possible.
Yeah.
So what I mean by all of that is that the composable side of the merchant now becomes attached to what their business goal is. Are we going for revenue? Are we going for, well, lowest cost is mostly at the end of it. Once you become an enterprise and the CFO says, hey, we need to reduce costs. So that's something later down. But it's about mitigating risk as much as possible as well. And it's just making sure that you can hit your goals and your successes without as little interference or as disruption from the composable components that you're using.
Yeah, fascinating. But then I guess that if companies start working with IXOPAY, you offer the full breadth of services, from tokenization, optimization, there's risk scoring. But typically, if customers start working with you, what is the most like common use case or feature that they leverage when they start working with for instance, IXOPAY?
Well, we offer both. We offer two flavors here, right? So we offer what we call the advanced orchestration platform, right? Flavor, which is I like to use the set menu analogy, right?
Yeah.
You get the full score, right? You have everything that if you go to a set menu, you have an appetizer, a meal, a dessert, right? You have everything to have like a full course, right? The full score. Or we have modular services, which is like a la carte, right? Things that you need and what you want to use, right? We offer both, right? Especially when we TokenX and IXOPAY merged with each other, right? So what we see a lot that comes over here is like when people are coming to you to leverage the full platform, they're quite mature in their payments journey already. They already have their own infrastructure. They're ready to displace. They're not startups. They're enterprise merchants. They're mid-market. Their pain points are really going to be around, hey, I'm going through maintenance fatigue, right? And I need to get to market faster, and go through other geos. I'm ready to displace what I've built so far, right? Or it's cost, or it's the cost of ownership. It's flexibility. Those are the decision makers that are happening here. When we get people that are more modular, they're not ready to give up their infrastructure that they've been building so far, right? And it's usually a political battle between internal and external, right? And the investments they've made. So, but they need control of their payment data. So they're going to want to use our universal token product. They're going to want to use the latest and greatest that we have in card lifecycle management, right? With our CAU APIs, right? Our PAR features, our fraud services, our 3DS, where they're able to kind of pick and choose what they want and use what they want and when they need it, right? And as they get more and more mature, they decide to kind of bridge over and say, you know what, I'm ready to get rid of this infrastructure and use this, right? Usually those decisions are going to be driven by markets that they can't achieve right now with their current connections. Those decisions are going to be, it's really it's time to market, right? But those are, it's a mix of decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that's like looking at the merchant side, but also other companies that I've seen who are on the payments infrastructure side of it, to call it like that. It's what I call the foot in the door strategy. Because whenever you want to make a decision like this, if you're doing 100 million, a billion, whatever you're doing, you don't just rip out your existing infrastructure and say, hey, let's just replace it. So what you're seeing is that companies like these are, because everything is so modular, because everything is so API driven, they can say, well, we can just give you a single API. We'll at least get the conversation started. You're a customer right now, and we can expand down the line, because implementing it might take a little bit longer. So I think this is the right approach, that companies that are saying, well, we have a full stack platform. However, if you want to get a modular component out of it, let's start with that. Let's get the conversation going. Let's get you to the goals that you want to achieve. And bit by bit, you can convince anybody in the company to actually do it. But also, because it's so data driven, you go out and actually get the results, and results make it easier for you to make a decision, because you can just point at it and stuff. And that's what you guys are seeing probably as well.
Exactly, 100%. We're seeing, especially when we see those that are going from modular to orchestration, the decisions that are making them are going to be driven by saying, we got the results we want. We understand, the benefit of owning your payment data and being, independent of your PSPs. Right now, we're ready to go ahead and really go full platform and give up a little bit of that control, right?
Great. Hey guys, we're here at Money2020, and there is a lot of buzz on stablecoins, on AI, on agentic commerce. There's so much happening. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because you, Dwayne, you've been writing about stablecoins and agentic AI recently. Really like your blogs, by the way.
Thank you.
What excites you most about these developments, and how do you see their convergence transforming the future of digital commerce?
Oh, very great question. So I think the first thing, that the way that I look at stablecoin is not as just an extension of what we've seen with crypto, right? I think we still look at the crypto market. There's still a lot of volatility. There's still a lot of interesting stuff. I think it's been great for innovation, and especially moving the conversation along in payments from, why are we still using relics as far as when it comes to settlements and just the times that we have it, right? Like when I still hear merchants saying, oh, we're on T+3, or we're on T+2, or we have a rolling reserve. And I'm like, this is something from the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. But I think stablecoins has opened up that conversation that settlements of funds to merchants doesn't need to be a T+1, T+2 type of activities. Like, it's opened up this newer way of settling globally in a faster way. So I'm personally much more interested in stablecoins being used as the back-end infrastructure, from the networks to the acquirers to actually getting funds settled to the merchant in a quicker basis, so that they can do whatever they have to do with it, right? It might be, if they're digitally, they just want to settle as quickly as possible. If they're platforms, they want to be able to pay out their vendors or the people who are on that platform as quickly as possible. So I think there's where I see a lot of buzz. It's still very US centric, right? So USDC is of course one of the main ones, but we're seeing EURC, we're seeing other elements coming in there as well. So I think that eventually is going to become a global thing, where all of the countries are going to say, if we have a national currency and there's a lot of volume in there, and we want to make sure that money moves faster, stable coins is probably the way to go. And I think it's up to payments companies to make sure that they integrate it into their platform, so that they can move their money as quickly as possible and pay out to merchants as quickly as possible as well. On the other side, I think AI is interesting. I've been using payments and data for the last 22 years. I'm actually a data scientist, so I actually studied artificial intelligence. I even called myself a data scientist when nobody even knew what it was, right? So I thought it was just the sexiest job of the 21st century. But I thought, hey, you gotta dream it. Yeah, you gotta speak it into existence. Yes. But I think what we're seeing right now is that we're also seeing that push from a lot of the legacy infrastructure players now saying, wait a second, we've been talking about data as the new oil. What are we doing with it? This is our oil to getting the engine to actually be much more efficient and using it. So I think AI is just a mechanism, or it's a technology that we can use to make what we have operate at a better, faster, safer way than we've done before. So just to give a couple of examples, right? Like there are different companies that are in this AI space, but when you look at how are we applying it on payments itself, It could be fraud prevention. That's probably the first thing that we look at, right? We have all this massive data, we have all of these data points, but we don't have the human capacity or the capabilities to analyze all of that data. Well, machine learning, which is a part of artificial intelligence, let's start applying machine learning in better cases. Companies were already doing it. Now we're just seeing with OpenAI and all of these other generative AI components, shining a light on that again. Hey, wait, we can actually utilize these things. It's machine learning, but then we can also put generative AI on it so that we can understand it as well. So we get explainable AI as well. So, hey, what can we actually learn from this? So I think that's a great way to go about it. But then you go into other fields, customer support. I remember that I was at some companies where we had hundreds of people trying to manage the queries that were coming in. Like, hey, why can't I find transaction XYZ basically? Now you can apply generative AI, put it on a large data warehouse and actually apply, and they can go research their own data basically, or the transactions. They can refund it. They can start using agentic AIs to actually make processes happen much more smoothly. So I think what it will do is it will make things much more efficient overall in payments. I think it will help us innovate a lot more and come up with new solutions, but it also will be key in making sure that the agentic AI space that we're talking about is actually applied as well. Because payments companies will still be a part of it. The connection to the networks will still be a part of it. It's just up for those payments companies to actually adopt it and actually say, how are we a part of it? Or risk the chance of being out-innovated by a third party again.
Yeah. And that's also why I'm really keen to learn from you, Yasser. How do you see these developments and how could that potentially also, impact your roadmap or innovation?
So I'll start off a little bit with stablecoin, right? From our perspective, the acceptance of stable coins, at the consumer level and so forth, we're not a big player in that space, right? But where we do play with regards to a lot of these coin providers and platforms, right, is really enabling these providers and platforms when on-ramping, the on-ramp aspect, right? So they can get people to start using these coins. That's where we've really seen a presence from IXOPAY's perspective, especially like with customers like Crypto.com, right, and OKCoin, where we see when it comes to agentic AI, I think that's going to be a really interesting field, right? And a lot of the common use cases that are present for payment orchestration, first one everybody thinks of is like, helping me out with authorization uplifts, right? That's like the very first common use case that everybody comes and thinks of. And that's definitely on our roadmap, right? But one of the things that we've become really aware of, especially when we talk about with these big companies and these payment operators, right, is they want, they want the recommendation, they want the insights on their data, right? They don't know if I'm not sure if they want us to act on it on their behalf yet. That's a level of trust that I think, as AI matures in payments, we'll see them give that control up. But we're still not, right now we're seeing a lot of them say, hey, we want those, recommendations. We want to be able to see where we can get authorization uplifts, right? Especially in fraud, right? Fraud, we see it already, decisions, yes, no, driven, right? And I think that's always been ripe and ready to go after, and it's matured. But I think when it comes to the other aspects, right, it's yet to mature. But I think we'll definitely get to a point where we're becoming agentic, right? Yep. Where we're making those decisions on your behalf based on cost, on the best PSP to send it to, right, for authorization, based on trends and so forth, leveraging all that machine learning, all of those insights, and applying agents there. Those use cases are coming. They're definitely on our roadmap, and we're looking at putting those things out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I know that this afternoon there's some sessions on agentic AI, identity. I think that's also a really interesting piece. How do you solve for identity and for fraud? But here I really would like to thank you for a deep dive into payment orchestration. Yes. We really went in with a bit more depth, so amazing. And thanks for sharing your perspectives on stablecoins, AI, and the future of payments, because I think this year is maybe less boring than last year in terms of what's happening. So super. Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks, Yasser.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.